Hey y'all, how you doing? Kev here. So, the great Jeff Beck is gone. He was definitely an influence on me, there's no doubt. Up there in my earliest guitar playing years. That was around the time that his album, Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop, came out. And in some ways, Jeff Beck kinda saved me from a lot of trouble at this point in my life. And I'd like to give you the same lesson that I got, okay? The backstory here is back in 1978, when my little brother was born. My mom got very seriously ill and nearly died, and she was saved by a combination of my father taking turns with the nurse to give my mom blood transfusions. That nurse stayed a very close friend of my mother's. They stayed in touch for years and years. They're still in touch today, 45 years later. Now, sometime back in again, I'm putting this somewhere in the 88, 90, 91, 92 range. I'm not sure exactly. The London Times newspaper, their Sunday edition, called the Sunday Times, of course. My parents loved the Sunday Times because it was an entire day's reading for both of them. So this was Sunday. Sunday was the Times and a couple of Irish newspapers as well. The Times had, of course, they had the standard news section. There was cartoons in there as well. There was a style magazine, and then there was what was called the Sunday Times magazine, right? Now, in that Sunday Times magazine, of course, they had a whole bunch of different things. But one of the things that ran quite regularly around that time was, and I don't remember what it was called, but it was something to the effect of the expert's expert, where they went and found people who were the top of their game in different fields and asked them who they thought was the best person around at that time. And one of the things that they did then was the rock guitar player. And they would have asked Eric Clapton and Brian May and probably Keith Richards and maybe some of the American guys as well. I don't recall exactly who was who. But one thing I do remember, I will never forget, is that they all agreed, every single one of them, that Jeff Beck was their top guitar player. So I was really enamored with this little 2-page article. In fact, it was 1 page, and this wonderful old photograph of Jeff Beck on stage with his graffiti yellow Stratocaster. Dark night, bright light on him, and clearly it was raining there too, so it was this rain around him. It was a magical photograph. So I remember sitting down and looking at this picture and reading this article over and over again. I was completely like, who are all these names? This is wonderful. And my mom saw me with this, and she said, who's that guy? I said, it's a guy called Jeff Beck. All the other great guitar players rate him as the greatest guitar player around at this point in time. And my mom said, I wonder if that's the guy that Sandy's husband treated. Her friend Sandy, the nurse who saved her life back in 1978, she married one of the top ear specialists in London, which is in Harley Street, which is the famous London street for all the top doctors. So apparently there was one of the top rock and roll players had gone to see this doctor, and this player was lying on the floor, curled up in a ball, and screaming in pain and agony because of the ear damage that he had. Now, I didn't know what truth there was to this. I didn't know if my mom was trying to tell me a porky to make sure that I didn't turn into one of those loud rock and roll guys. I did. But as it turned out, a few years later in the late 90s, I had heard this story again, and it was indeed Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck talked publicly about this, and yes, in fact, he was lying on the floor, curled up in a ball, crying because of the level of hearing damage he had. He had tinnitus, or what some people call it tinnitus, but most people I think call it tinnitus. That's that ringing that in your ears that you get from ear damage. For me, it's a high-pitched squeal up around the 8 kilohertz, and it's there constantly. And in his case, it got so bad, it stopped him sleeping at night. And at this point, when he was lying on the floor, curled up in a ball, crying, because he hadn't slept properly in over 3 weeks. He couldn't sleep long enough. This ringing in his ears was keeping him awake at night. And if anybody has gone even 48 hours without sleep, you know that sooner or later your brain starts hallucinating. It's doing everything it possibly can in every moment to try and dream, because it's such an important physiological process. So he was lying on the floor with this ringing in his ears, screaming at him like the loudest noise you've ever heard, high-pitched whine, going constantly while he's hallucinating. So this Harley Street doctor came to, he went to see him, who happened to be the husband of this woman, Sandy, this nurse that saved my mother's life back in 1978. And having heard that story a good decade before Jeff Beck talked about it, I made sure that I always had my hearing protection with me. And usually in the concerts, the concerts were loud too, but often it was the DJ after we played that was what really blew us out of the water sound level wise. So when I'm taking my gear down after the gig, hearing protection definitely went in. And I was very careful, and lucky too that I worked with other musicians who were careful about their hearing. We weren't too loud in the studio, we weren't too loud on stage. If we could possibly avoid it, we were perfectly capable of saying to our sound engineer, something is too loud, we need to turn it down. And that really saved me. I do have tinnitus today, but now with long COVID, the tinnitus is definitely there, a lot stronger, and a lot of other people with long COVID have reported this too. So, take the lesson from Jeff Beck, okay? Protect your hearing. Tinnitus is something that has no treatment. There are people out there who say that there are treatments. There are not treatments. There is nothing you can do to make it go away. In Jeff Beck's case, what saved his life was a form of psychotherapy called cognitive behavioral therapy, which gave him the mental tools to learn how to deal with it, how to put up with it, and how to live his life and get to sleep while this constant high-pitched squeal is in his ears. And in fact, in the last sort of 20 years of his life, he became known as somebody that if he turned up to sound check and it was too loud on stage, he walked out the door and he didn't come back. He was not putting himself through that crap for anybody. No amount of money could make him do that. These are the only years we get. We can't fix these, okay? Hearing damage is absolutely permanent, and you only know it's there when it's too late. If you have a few too many of those concerts where you come home either as an audience member or on stage, and your ears are ringing for a day or two, that's a sign that permanent damage is being done, okay? And once it starts, you're screwed. You cannot undo it. So look after your hearing. Thank Jeff Beck for that particular lesson, because I know that story that came through my mom, through that nurse, about Jeff Beck, I know that helped me protect my hearing today. And that has made a huge difference to my life. There's no question. And of course, as an artist and an inspiration, I played Jeff Beck's Guitar Shop over and over again. It was kind of like, in some ways it was kind of like Steve Vai's Passion and Warfare. It blew the doors off the limits of what we thought rock guitar could be. Obviously his whammy bar. Taught us all what was really possible, but just his sense of melodic style and phrasing and melody was just wonderful, and that will leave a mark on how people play the guitar and on music for centuries to come, I think. So thank you, Jeff Beck. Take care of yourself, everybody. Remember, keep your keep your ear protection close, and if you haven't explored Jeff Beck's music, now is a perfectly good time to do it. Dive in and listen. There's always something that you can take from it. Take care of yourself, look after yourselves, and I'll talk to you soon, okay?